better. We're doing what we're doing because it's the right thing to do, not because of any tax incentives from either the state of Michigan or from Scio Township. Now, our August 18th decision to stay and expand our business in Michigan did mean that we needed to properly address the concerns of our neighbors about our remediation program. We needed to work cooperatively to architect an effective remediation plan for the areas surrounding our plant, known as the core area. A plan which would serve the best interests of the community, our neighbors, the company, and the company's shareholders. We needed a plan that could be broadly and enthusiastically supported by the residents of Scio Township, the township trustees, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, and Gelman Sciences. I personally wanted to begin the process of repairing what I felt were damaged relationships with the community, and I wanted to reestablish Gelman Sciences as a good corporate citizen. None of you can experience what I felt coming into this community 2.5 years ago and going out to the Chamber of Commerce, going out to functions in the community, and when I announced myself as the new president of Gelman Sciences, the only reaction I got was, "Oh, we know Gelman Sciences, you're the ugly polluter over on Wagner Road," and the conversation stopped right there. I mean, I was very, very hurt. I continue to be hurt today by that reaction, and part of what I strongly feel is we're going to rebuild our image as a responsible corporate citizen, so I can be proud to go out and represent a company that employs 540 people in Washtenaw County, Scio Township. Since that August 18th announcement, all of the affected parties have worked together on the technical details of this new proposal for remediation of the core area. As an assurance that Gelman Sciences will abide by the agreement, the MDEQ and the Attorney General's Office have agreed to issue the permits and modify the consent judgment such that they are consistent with the proposal. The state is going to modify the agreement so that it goes beyond the requirement of the law to the 3 ppb level in the unlikely event that we have to go to surface water discharge. As a company, Gelman Sciences is committed to begin the core area remediation as quickly as we can possibly do that. As Sybil mentioned, we've already restarted the Evergreen system. That system is running and treating to a level of non-detect. One of the things that I was troubled by when I got into this last June, and I sat down, I remember sitting down with Roger for an evening in my office. I think we spent about 4 hours after hours, and him taking me through all of the history, all of the history of the remediation effort and the controversy. I was troubled by the fact that all of the most recent data that I saw had a date on it of about 1993, and nobody had really bothered to go out and sample and do all of the hydrogeological survey work that was necessary to really characterize the current nature of the contamination. So, as was mentioned earlier, we have just completed a very extensive sampling program so that we can completely recharacterize the nature of the contamination and better understand it. That's the first thing we've got to do, is get a current October 1995 understanding of what the problem is. And I think there are really 2 things that are very critically important that are first and foremost in my mind. Number 1 is that the 1,4-dioxane problem must be remediated. Number 2 is that through the remediation method, we cannot exacerbate the problem, and we cannot affect anyone that is currently unaffected by the problem. And when you see the fact that this is put into a first stage trial, when we're taking water out of the ground and we're putting it back down in, we want to fully understand the hydrogeological dynamics of what we're dealing with. We're taking water out, treating it, and putting it back in. And our agreement with the DNR is that in that process, and we think we can manage this to successful conclusion, but our agreement is we will not, by groundwater reinjection, substantially change the size and the shape of the plumes. And we're going to be very, very careful that in putting water back into the groundwater tables, we don't push this problem out and cause a new problem for anybody that doesn't have it today. Let's solve it in the right way. Let's solve it with groundwater reinjection, but let's be very careful and cautious in our approach and make sure that we don't make the problem worse or affect anybody that's not affected today. The core area remediation proposal, which we've submitted, and there's copies of it here available for people. There's something new in Gelman Sciences sharing information. We actually brought copies of the proposal. We know you can go get them. You know, we don't want to put you through the pain of digging through file cabinets and going to the archives and everything. I mean, it's public record. We ought to just provide it. We've done that tonight. But the proposal we submitted is necessary. It's appropriate for the community and the residents. All of the parties involved have contributed equally to the plan, and we're proud to be here together to solicit public comment on the proposal to the MDEQ. The plan calls for Gelman Sciences to use groundwater reinjection in the core area as the primary method of remediation. Boy, was that a big hurdle for us to get over, by the way. Because as soon as I put that on the table back in June with Roger and Patty, I remember the first reaction was, oh, here you go again, you're switching horses, you were going to go to surface water discharge, now you're coming back to confuse us. We're doing groundwater reinjection because it's the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to discharge this stuff into the creek unless we absolutely have no other alternative. So we changed our approach because I felt it was the right thing to do, and I'm going to stand by that. The purged groundwater from the contaminated aquifer is going to be treated so that the presence of 1,4-dioxane is reduced to 77 parts per billion or less prior to reinjection. The proposal considers the use of Honey Creek for effluent discharge at levels of 3 parts per billion or less of 1,4-dioxane only in the event of failure of the groundwater reinjection method. And although we've got some technical agreement to reach with the DNR, the basic conceptual agreement is that failure means we cannot, by reinjection, control the size or shape of the plumes, or we're causing a problem for somebody that doesn't have it, as I talked about earlier. We feel fully confident that we can engineer a system that will properly remediate and have groundwater reinjection as the strategy by which we do that. I also want to make a point that the plan does not contemplate use of either the Scio Township or City of Ann Arbor sewer systems as a part of the remediation plan. Although the plan does not propose specific remediation for the western plume, the western plume is now being further characterized. We've sampled it, and as we better understand the western plume, an appropriate western plume remediation plan will be proposed at the earliest opportunity. We've agreed since the beginning, since the first meeting I had with Roger and Patty, that the western plume was on the table, but it was critically important that we begin remediation at the core area right now. Every day that we don't pump that water out and treat it, the problem gets worse, and I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. We want the core area remediation started as quickly as we can. There's a lot of issues with the western plume that need to be, first of all, we've got to characterize it and understand what it is. Secondly, I will tell you that there are issues of access and other things that we need to deal with. Working together, we're going to solve it. We're going to have a problem, and we're going to do it just in the same way we did on the core area, through a dialogue and through working together. And the western plume remediation plan is going to be developed with the same involvement and dialogue with which the core area remediation plan has been developed. Now, further, I've agreed to chair an ongoing working group, which is going to include township residents and township trustees. We've identified a group of about 6 people that will work on an ongoing basis and meet regularly to share information and data about progress as the remediation proceeds. The working group will also address other open issues and concerns about the remediation, offering the same ongoing opportunity for the contribution from all parties that we've had in the construction of the current proposal. We believe that our proposal is an example of business and the community sharing a common goal and working together to achieve responsible solutions. Gelman Sciences is committed to make every effort to succeed with the primary aspect of our proposal, groundwater reinjection. I also want to say that it's a more expensive solution for the company. It's going to cost us more to do groundwater reinjection than surface water discharge. I'm also going to tell you that although I agree with the DNR that once, or the DEQ, excuse me, I fell into that trap. Although I agree with the DEQ in principle that once you have the water out of the ground and treat it, it's just easier to keep it out of the ground and go with a surface water discharge. we are not going to pursue that route. That is not the route that we're going to pursue. We're going to make groundwater reinjection work, even though it may not be the easiest and most straightforward approach. But it is more expensive, and in order to do that, I personally committed, everybody knows we got some significant tax abatements from the state of Michigan and Scio Township. I've committed that we're going to set aside a certain amount of those tax incentives that we received to fund the additional cleanup effort and ensure the success of groundwater reinjection as the strategy for the remediation. This is a great step forward for the future of Gelman Sciences, for Scio Township and the residents of Scio Township. Now, since I'm not a technical guy, but I'm learning pretty quick, to more thoroughly explain the proposal, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rick Harding. Rick is the president and a senior principal of Integrated Environmental. That firm has been retained by Gelman Sciences as our technical consultant in the remediation effort. Rick has helped me a lot in working closely with the residents and with the DEQ on making sure that this proposal was what we all wanted it to be, and I'd like to bring him up for about 30 minutes to explain the more technical aspects of the proposal. Rick?
Thank you. What I'd like to do is basically give an overview of the plan, interrupt you at any time if you have any questions. And what I'll do is basically restate the goal that Kim has stated to make it clear in no uncertain terms that we're after groundwater injection and not looking back. So that's our goal. So there's a unique account. So we're going to support groundwater injection. Spend just a little bit of time on background in terms of what happens with the groundwater, back to your address in terms of, what's going on with the groundwater and therefore what's going on with the dioxane. It's important that we kind of all agree that we have a certain basic understanding of what's going on there, because it's paramount that we understand that in terms of why it makes sense to go forward in the way that we're proposing to go forward in a safe manner so that we can make the reinjection work instead of service water. And then we'll go over the schedule, because as Kim said, the schedule that you see and the one that we, quote unquote, will be held to from a compliance point of view with the consent judgment is not our internal schedule. And the way we've been working so far is we're already a month ahead of schedule. And we've done things without official approval, but with the knowledge of the DEQ and the citizens, etc., because we definitely want to get ahead of schedule. Anywhere we get ahead of schedule, we want to get ahead of schedule. All right, with that, I want to restate in no uncertain terms that we're going after remediation using groundwater reinjection and not surface water injection. It's not even in the plan. As Sybil has pointed out, it's simply a contingency administratively with the consent judgment, and that's all we're going to do. All right, let's get at a little bit of background information to make sure everybody is oriented. And this panel here on the key areas, as you guys are well aware of. I have not been involved in this as long as you folks have. But basically there's three components. There's the quote-unquote core area, and there's the western plume, and then the evergreen plume. A couple important points. I'll be using the term, you've probably heard these terms many, many times. If you use unit D0s or D0s, Unit C3, and Unit D2, which we'll talk about very simple terms, nothing mystical, it's easy to understand. But basically, from a hydrogeo, or how the water behaves, it behaves differently here than it does here than it does here, because of these geologic formations. But what's key to remember is no matter what else, this is the source. And we've got to attack the source. If we didn't have this source, we obviously wouldn't have this, we wouldn't have this. So just by orientation, we're going to be really focusing on these three components. Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you can address it, or maybe if Leon could address it better, but should be assumed since the Maine Michigan Department of Public Health data showed that hit on Elizabeth, that that western plume is now moving north of 94
Yeah, I'll address that, but make sure I do. I have something coming up there.
Do you know what date these
The data that I'm talking about is 93, 94. That's the most current data I can find. All right, now that we have the key areas, let's talk a little bit about the hydrogeology. What's going on below the ground in terms of how the water behaves. And that's this panel. So as I was just telling you, we basically have three systems. In the core area, they have what is called this C3. And I have that cross-section instead of the key areas. So we have the C3, then we have this called D0, and then we have the D2, which feeds evergreen. Basically, what's going on in very simple terms is that there's water in this geologic unit here that's from near ground surface down to a certain depth, which is shown in the cross-section, but it's a little harder to see. So basically what happens, this is above the D2. So what happens is, in the hydraulics here is such that the water table is kind of flat around this source there, around the plant where the dioxane is. So it's kind of flat. So when it does move, it moves generally in this direction. That's not to say, and a similar thing happens relative to Elizabeth, I'll get into that. Is there's also components of flow in other directions. There's some radial component of the route. But the predominant flow is indeed in this direction. And not only does it go in that direction up here, but when it gets over here, it actually goes what I call down the bathtub grade. Because what happens here is the D2 is underneath the C3. And there's actually an underground channel or pipe geologically that's surrounded with clay that isn't very permeable. It's a sandy gravel deposit. So what happens is the water trucks along here, then it gets to this drain, which is D2, and it just rushes down right here. Comes along like this, and then it gets to this unit here, which is a vertically downward, goes into that pipeline, and off to evergreen. Okay? That's how it works. So this feeds D2, which goes to evergreen. Very important to understand. It's also important to realize there is some component of flow in to the south and to the west, okay? That we got to accommodate. But the principal flow is in the direction here that feeds and runs off to evergreen down below. Okay? Now at the same time, we have another geologic deposit. This is a big transition zone between three geologic formations, so it can get a little complex. But basically what is happening is both the D2 below and the C3 above the D2, there is some water that does flow into the west, into this D0 unit. This D0 unit is big in terms of size. It's like water flowing into a pond, so it's underground. So you begin to understand things in terms of why you see the plumes behave the way you do, which we'll get into. But the important thing to realize is the water out of the C3 and the source of the dioxane, the bulk of it dumps down into D2 and runs off everywhere. There is less flow, but there is flow that moves into the west. And as this flows, you'll say, well, why does this take this shape? Well, what happens is it's big over here, so the water is flowing slow. But what happens is it narrows down here. And it narrows right when this starts narrowing. And that's where you see everybody talk about these artesian conditions. Okay. What they're talking about is the channel gets smaller underground. When that happens, you got all this water coming into a smaller pipe. So what happens? It gets under pressure. Pressure builds up. So when there's pressure built up, it forces the water to move up. It's compressing. It's an incompressible fluid. So when you push on it, it's got to go somewhere. So what it has a tendency to do is to go vertical. And then you got holes in the ground, which are spring. So you got all these artesian conditions. So what will happen is the bulk of the water, the tendency of the water is to go vertically up. And that's why you see these plume changes. Things are getting narrower in here. And they're also getting under pressure, and you got water moving up instead of just laterally. That's not to say that there isn't still some water that goes beyond that. The big argument has been, okay, is the artesian conditions really blocking this? Is it venting everything or not? My opinion, the data isn't sufficient to say that. We're convinced that we need some more data to say, is there still some flow that's getting beyond the artesian conditions? Okay? So the bottom line is, the dioxane is going to behave like the water. Where the water is, it's just going to go to water. It's very, very important to understand this basic concept. Because no matter how much data you look at, this is basically what's going on. C3 dumps into D2, runs off to Evergreen. The D2 and the C3 in the source feed into the western. And then it gets under pressure when the channel, where the channel is. Okay? Is there any questions about those basics?
Just tell us what the roads are there, so the audience.
Oh, yes, thank you, I should have done that. All right, this is Jackson Road, across here. This is I-94, through here. Here's Wagner, here's Liberty. Did I do it?
Across the,
Here?
north-south.
Yeah, this is Parkland Plaza.
That one.
This one here? How is that? West what? Delhi? Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, there's a little piece of West Delhi south of 994. That's what that is.
And again, this is based on 93, 94 data. But it's important in terms of going forward and understand what we're proposing to do to realize what's going on here, because we want to take full advantage of this. There's a lot of things that are working for us, and we should take advantage of it. I mean, this underground pipeline is a good thing in one sense, and then we'll control it because it's narrow, but we'll get into that. So there's some things here that are working for us, and it's important to understand this. Everybody okay with that? Now let's talk about the 1,4-dioxane distribution. Don't need that. Look familiar? I just kept the same tune always. We'll have this ingrained in our brain. All right, so what this is basically, here's that C3 core area we were just talking about. All right? Now, this outline here, again, it's based on the 93, 94 data, is at 1 part per billion, which is the detection limit. So basically what we're saying, here's where it is, here's where it's not. So if it's outside of that line, we haven't seen it. Not to say that we have all the monitoring points we need, and we'll get to that. Now, Elizabeth, okay? Now, yeah, there was a hit of 1 part per billion, I believe, now and again at Elizabeth. And that gets back, I need the other one on the, what's happening there, you know, it's a subtlety, but it's an important point. Okay. What's going on here? See this flow component here? This is idealized and generalized. What happens here is that there is a northern component of flow right about in here. If you look at the groundwater contours in terms of which direction the water goes, it basically kind of starts out northerly here. And then when it gets into that cross section I showed you where the channel narrows, then she takes off on a good westerly trend. But in this area right here, there is a northern component to flow, which is something that was brought up in the CDM report. So yeah, that is true. Now whether or not this northern component of flow could possibly, and that's one of the reasons, in addition to the size of the aquifer, that this spreads out so wide here, because there is a northerly component of flow. Otherwise, it'd be a little narrower. Okay. Plus, it's being fed by the C3. So whether or not that is attributable to that component that represents that or not, I really don't know. We really need to look at that to see whether or not it's here or here. Okay? Did that answer your question?
I think I could just ask Leon too. I just wondered if did they just sample? Did they sample all along Elizabeth, or do you have any idea if this is characteristic of that area or just unique to that particular household?
Lois Graham with Michigan Department of Public Health, she identified wells along the plume edge that needed to be sampled. And we signed a contract with them earlier in the year in which that all those wells we sample on a quarterly basis. And she is the one that plots them on the plume maps up at the state.
Probably from this sampling, we can't tell if that's necessarily representative of that area, because they're just relatively, whoever has contracted to have their wells sampled are the ones that are tested.
I don't know about the current results, the most recent sampling, but in the past, there was one well that kind of helped. Sometimes it was showing, sometimes it wasn't, but it was only just one well, and I think most every house on that street was being tested. So that's what made it unclear to us what was the source, because you'd expect to see, if it were a plume, more than one house would be hit, and maybe even initially maybe just one, but then you'd start seeing more, and we never did. So that was one that was
Wasn't the
kind of
funding
inconclusive.
stopped short of right after, though, that they did 2 testings, and then that's it, the funding was stopped, so they never really got to follow up on it?
That could be. I know there were at
my
least,
impression
I
from Lois,
think,
that's what she told me.
okay, I think there were 2 or 3, but it's been a long time, it's been a while.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
quite a long
so,
time
so
ago.
it'd be real interesting to see what the new results show, whether or not that's showing anything at all.
Well, the new results did show a hit,
Oh, did they show a hit on
right,
that?
on that house. But again, it was, you know, half the time it was not there, half the time it was there.
And they didn't show it on any of the other ones then?
No.
No.
Okay.
Another point to remember is that these samples and these big red, these big symbols here represent the sampling that we just did the past couple of weeks. We sampled 82 wells. And you can see with these dots, out of the ones that were available to us, we basically did all that we could so that we get good coverage so you can find where things are. And we took water level measurements in all, not all those locations, I think there were 71 locations. And then 82 samples tested for dioxane, which I'll get into. But basically, we want to see, well, where are we now, kind of thing. But basically, these have been non-detect above, north of that. So that hit here, there, 1 ppb is really tough to say what's going on with. All right, but basically, what you need to understand in terms of the consent judgment and also what the right thing to do is in the core, principally in the C3, but also in the D2, because it dumps down into it. You have dioxane that's in the hundreds of parts per million. Okay, gotta get it out. And you don't have to be a hydrogeologist, come to that conclusion. Okay, so we want to focus on getting this out of here. Because the more you reduce this mass, then obviously the less there's going to be going to Evergreen, and the less that's going to feed into the Western. So as Kim stated, we have Evergreen back online as of October 11th. So we'll keep that running, because whatever does get out there, then we get it there. And then go forward, gathering the data that we need, but at the same time, let's get rid of the dioxane. Let's pull it out of the ground, get rid of it, while we're getting the data that we need. But it's important to realize that this is really the hot spot. Yes, you have a contour, a 500 part per billion line that goes way down here to Evergreen. Okay? Goes all the way down here. Anybody not to understand that? It's not just here. It dumps into the D2, races off to Evergreen. Evergreen's very, very important. Okay? What it does is it follows that geologic channel, that pipe. And this, we'll come back to that when we come to the design. Because if we start re-injecting in here, we're going to change some things here we got to be careful. Now, as far as the Western, you can see that the intensity of the dioxane into the Western is very low in comparison to the D2, because the C3 is laying on top of the D2 and dumps into it. Whereas the D0 and the cross-section is kind of butting against those two things. So you have less flow and therefore less dioxane. So your 500, based on this data, I'm assuming the new data doesn't change it that much. What we've seen so far, it doesn't. Because it's pretty limited back here, pretty much into the core. And then the Western, you have the 77 parts per billion. The reason why I put that on there is because that's the current compliance point with the new 201 DEQ for illustration purposes. So here's the 77 parts per billion sticking out here. Now we all know the infamous fingers that we call it. finger. This extent of contamination out here, and this is really the point that needs to be addressed in terms of, is this artesian condition really working here, or is there something going down there? That's still a question that needs to be addressed. Yes, sir.
And where is the car wash? Is that a factor?
The car wash.
There's a car wash on Jackson.
It's that little circle thing up there, to your right. To your
Back
right.
this way?
There was a little blip on the early readings that caused a,
Oh,
bubble up
this is
above.
all like that on that
Right.
drawing that you gave me?
right, and some of the earlier samples, and then
Yeah.
everybody theorized that was the car wash, calling it that way, but,
Well, again, once we get the new data set, then we'll have current data, you know, today, saying where is the dioxane and where is it? And that's very, very important. Okay? But this is the distribution of dioxane in those units that we talked about, based on the 93-94 data, okay?
I have a couple questions. One,
Yeah.
what is the depth of all the wells, and is that as far down as the testing goes? And you've mentioned the plumes moving out in different directions. How do you know they're not underneath the location of the deepest wells being tested and moving around? And also, the sites lower down there where you don't have any testing done at all, how do you know it's not moving in that direction?
In which particular direction?
South.
Southwest.
Well, we have this point, and this point. Whether it's moving down there or not is a question. Now, in terms of where the wells are screened, they are screened down into the D unit, and the screened interval is such that if it was there, basically the way dioxane disperses itself in water, it's not like some things I read where they said it really sinks. It really doesn't sink that much. It's 1.03 in terms of its specific gravity, a little heavier than water. But it's not like trichloroethylene, 1.6, you know, those chlorinated solvents that really sink with gravity. So the tendency is to, again, disperse and kind of wherever the water molecules are, that goes. So the probability of it getting down underneath a well and getting by it isn't like that. I'm not saying it's not possible, but the behavior of that plume is that it disperses, and it's fairly uniform in a sense in terms of how it partitions in the water, because it really doesn't like water. It kind of hangs around with it. So whether or not we have a sufficient number of monitoring points here to say, yeah, we're confident that this is the extent here and here and here, is something I want to take a look at with good data, or current data. Because we have all kinds of data for a long, long period of time, but we haven't gotten anything since about 93, 94. So I'd really like to take a look at this and not be biased by any historical data, saying, here's what we got now. And then take a hard look at those monitoring locations and say, do we need some more to address the very points that you're talking about? And what we'll do when we have the data, which I'm getting ahead of myself, but anyway, when we have the data, then we want to come back with a proposal saying, we think we need to do X, Y, and Z in the Western. And that's when we got to get together and talk about that. Okay? And we'll move forward. I think it's clear to everybody we'd like some more data. And we should get together on what that means and what's a good place to put wells and screen intervals, et cetera, so that everybody feels comfortable that it's going to give us the answers we want. There's no sense spending a lot of time and money and not getting the maximum benefit out of the data. Did that answer your question? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the dioxane distribution follows the behavior of the water. We deal with the water, and we're going to deal with the dioxane. Now let's go back and make sure we remember where we are. All right, remember, we're doing groundwater reinjection, not surface booster. All right, how are we going to do that? In order to attack this, get rid of that source, we need to optimize where we extract water from and where we put it back in. We have some existing extraction wells or purge wells in terms of where we're going to collect water from in the core and treat. The one thing we need to do in terms of getting to final design, and that's another point I want to make in terms of the schedule. We have to look at this process and why it's staged. And basically what we're saying we're going to do is we're going to collect data that we need to design the full-scale system to treat all of the dioxin that we need to treat in terms of the source. But we want to do it prudently and step by step. And while we are doing that, we want to be doing some good by reducing the mass of dioxin. So what's really going to happen here is we're going to go forward with turning on a bunch of wells and injecting it. We're going to get some data, use that data, do some more extraction and some more reinjection, and we will step ourselves right to the point where we got it covered. We're not going to do it all at once. To do so would not be prudent.
So you're saying you use the core area as a model for getting data as you're cleaning to how to better approach the other areas?
Yeah, let me get right into that. Okay? And I got another slide that'll talk about what we propose to do, where we propose to extract it from, and how we're going to use that data to move forward. Excellent question. So in order to optimize the situation so we extract the water that we need to get out and put it back where it's safe to, in terms of what Kim had talked about earlier, in terms of not causing problems for others who don't have problems now, because I'm sure no one here wants to take their problems and say, well, that's somebody else's now. I don't think any of us want that. But there's 3 simple steps that we have to take to make that happen. The first step is, as we said, we need current data. Where are we now? As soon as we get where are we now, then we can move forward with a little more confidence, instead of just assuming that the historical data is still true now. It's been too long. Step 2 is the field test groundwater reinjection in terms of only for the purpose of getting enough design data to go forward to pump more. That's all it is. It's not a stall tactic. It's not a study. It's we're going to take the dioxane out of the core, and while we're doing that, we're going to get data so that we can go on and design additional extraction wells necessary to critical, so we can get the rest of it. And then lastly, we want to use all that in the final design. We want to use just the current, want to look at all of it, because as many people have pointed out to me, and rightfully so, that we want to look at trends in the dioxane distribution. Now in terms of the flow, maybe this will help pull it all together. Hopefully that's why I did this. We walk through what we're proposing to do. Basically, there's 3 components, like we just talked about. Let's go over on the component on the left and talk about what that is and of what benefit that is to us in terms of moving forward. We're saying we need to redefine where the dioxane is now. So what we need to do is be able to say, where is this non-detect line? Where's 500? Where's 77? Where is it today? That's what we got to find out. And what are we going? If we can say that, yeah, we understand that. Fine. If we say we really can't do that well, we're going to need to evaluate further. Back to your point. Do we have sufficient number of wells to do that? Questions like that. We have to convince ourselves that we have enough data. So once we do that, then we move on to using that data to optimize where we're going to take water from. Because we obviously want to pull dioxane out of the groundwater. And in order for you to do that effectively, you need to know where it is and where the concentrations are highest. And how it's moving in order to do that. So that information, again, if we need more information, we'll get more information. But what we're doing is using them all into the final design for the entire system. Step by step. Now this gets into the quote-unquote stage 1 field test. Really didn't know what to really call it other than that, but I think that's really what it is. But not, didn't want to be misleading. It was just a test and we were really originally doing remediation, because we are. This is the beginning of remediation. Because what we want to do is 2 things, 2 critical things. One is, in order for us to treat the core and get rid of the dioxane, we got 2 major questions. One is, can we just pull that water out of the ground in the condition that it's in, the quality that it's in, forget the dioxane. The other water quality aspects, the ions, the iron, the bacteria, the total organic carbon, all that stuff. Because the water quality in the core is very, very, very different from the water quality in evergreen, and we're having a hell of a time keeping evergreen. So we're going to have major requirements here to pre-treat that water, not for dioxane, but for everything else, in order to put it into the treatment system that we already have in place before we can re-inject it. If we don't do that, the re-injection well isn't gonna work. Major headache, major expense. Tim is well aware. This is very expensive, but it has to be done. So while we are doing this, we'll be collecting that kind of data to incorporate it into the design. We already know that pre-treatment is necessary. We're not going to be able to not pre-treat and keep those wells running. No question about it. We got enough data now to say that. So that will go into the final design. The hydraulics. This is what Kim was talking about when he said, look, we don't want to push it around and create problems for somebody else. Absolutely. So we have to know, by pulling water out, putting water back in, what are we going to do to the dioxane? Where are we going to push it? Where are we going to pull it? Where is it going to be? Causing a bigger problem than we have now? How do we adjust for that? Critical information. You can't prudently go forward with this kind of strategy without this kind of information in terms of what's going to happen in C3 and D2. Because we already talked about it. When we put water back into C3, we're going to push water around. And we already know now, we can't take full design capacity pumpage. Like, say we have to take 300 gallons a minute out of the core in order to meet all our objectives. We can't put 300 GPM back in C3. It has the capacity, but our sense is right now that it's going to push that dioxane where we don't want it. So that's why what we're proposing to do in the field test, which I'll illustrate this in a second here, is go at something like staging it from 50, maybe up to 100 GPM because of that. But what we're going to have to find out, I'm sorry?
Oh, gallons.
Gallons per minute, thank you. Forgive me, I shouldn't find it. So we basically got to know, well, how much stuff can we put back in C3 not get trouble? And how much can we put back into D2 and not get trouble? And all that will determine the final design in terms of, well, how many extraction wells do we need where? How many monitoring wells do we need where? And how many re-injection wells do we need where? Got to have the data. So all of this that we're proposing to do goes into this, stepping into the final design. And as we're stepping into it, we're remediating the core. Key point. Some people would take the approach that's less aggressive, which is not Kim's style in terms of taking care of problems, and go out and let's do, an aquifer test, let's do this, let's do that, and kind of ditz around it and not be really going after it. And what we decided to do is really go after it. So while we're gathering data, we figure at 100 GPM, you're probably going to pull out 25 pounds a day of dioxane. That adds up after a while. Okay? So let's look at what we're proposing to do in terms of where we're going to pull water from. Yes, sir.
Is there any idea of the volume of water in that aquifer?
Billions of gallons. Even more than a year.
Was about 8 billion.
8 billion, something?
8 billion, that's estimated in 1989, so probably a lot more than that.
So let's look at what we're proposing to do in terms of pushing things around. Where's my next pen? I need that one. All right, so this is a blow-up of the core area, or what we do is focus in on the core area. So this is the core area here. Here's Honey Creek. So we're going to again. In here, here's Gelman Sciences over here. Here's the infamous little marshy area here. Here's TW1, which is an extraction well. There's the Redskin well, which you know something about it. The Redskin well. The Dog Park Purge well. What we're proposing to do is we're saying, well, if we think we can only take a maximum of 100 GPM out of the core because we can't put any more water than that back into C3, we said, well, how can we get as much dioxane out of here in the biggest area as possible with that kind of pumping? So what we're figuring out doing is taking out of PW1 the marshy area. It's going to be about 5 GPM thereabouts. And then over these three, we'll split up the rest to 100, roughly 30 or so. We won't know what it is because we'll step into it. What we want to do is from these 4 wells, collect at 100 gallons per minute. So we're collecting water from dioxane from this area, this area, this area, and this area. Then, an important point. Remember how I said that the C3 unit here, because this is all C3, it's all screened with C3, is pretty flat, the water table. Okay, so if you got something that's flat, and then you start dumping a lot of water into it, it's going to have a tendency to run, right? It's going to mound up and run radially. That's what you see here. What we have is water's being pulled in this direction. It's being pulled in this direction. Being pulled here, but then you're going to push it back here with the reinjection. So the water's going to come out, though, quote unquote, upgrading. But it's upgrading in the sense that C3 resides above D2, and that ultimately the C3 dumps into the D2. But if you're just looking at the C3, because it's so flat, you're going to be pushing water south and in east and west. And we have to push it and monitor that in order to know what we can do here. If you don't stress the system enough, it won't give you any data. So we're going to have to push the dioxane around in order to get the data that we need. Okay? So we're prudent in the approach in terms of when we turn these things on, we just don't go out there and crank them all on up to about 100 GPM. What we'll do is step them in line, online, well by well. And we start cranking up margin a little bit, and you crank this one up, and you watch stuff as you're turning things on. So that's how we'll proceed, watching it as we're turning it on. Yes, sir?
So your reinjection is back into the same aquifer?
Correct. That is correct.
Keep well or anything?
No. Good question. No, back into the C3. And that, we're hoping, even with pushing it to the south, that we'll be able to basically pull dirty water out. Pipes, the piping's already there, to bring it over to the treatment system that's already there. And then all we have to do is put this piping in and install the injection well for the test, put it back in here, and then, yeah, it'll push here, but our expectation and hope is it'll eventually come back down in. So you'll get some flushing by going up, okay, versus going somewhere else. Sooner or later, we know that we're not going to be able to put all the water we need here. We're going to have to put some back into D2. And when we do that, then there may be changes. We expect changes in the plume that's going everywhere. We're going to fess up to that right now. Important to take that into consideration, because we've got to be ready at the other end for the evergreen to make sure that we're going to accommodate that. So there's a lot of things, you got to think through this. You don't want to rush out there and just do this. So there's those kinds of considerations that we have to always be thinking about. And as we go through these working group sessions that Kim was talking about, we'll be sharing that, we'll be talking about it so people know as we go forward, what the expectations are. Right? So this is what we're proposing to do, is to do this, get rid of dioxane, get design data, so that then we can put in additional wells, injection wells, and extraction wells to do the complete remediation. So we'll step right into it. Right? Let's talk schedule. Basically, as Kim has already outlined, Evergreen's been online since October 11th. So we'll just work with that and keep it online and keep it running. And we have our challenges there in terms of the well there. Yes, sir.
Just from my own understanding, if there were, let's say, 9 billion gallons in the aquifer, if there were that kind of volume, is that static? You know what I mean?
Yes. That assumes, yes. To answer your question, yes.
So there's no additional water from other sources entering.
Well, and
It's static means there's, you know what
yeah, I
I mean?
understand. In order to come up with that, you assume
I don't-
a certain amount coming in, a certain amount going out. So in a steady state condition, generally, X volume, X gallons there. Though that would rise and fall depending on rain events, and, things of that sort. But in a general sense, it's about that, whether it's 8 billion or 6 billion. For what we're trying to do, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of water. The big thing is to be looking at the concentrations of dioxane. What's going on with that, and how you're able to control what's going on with the plumes. And in order to do that, like we said, we've got to control the water. Absolutely. But the longer we wait, you got the core that's still feeding Western and the Evergreen. Yes, Rob?
There should be one clarification about the 8 billion. When GSI did their mass study, they said there was about 2.3 billion gallons of water contaminated. And they would have to pump maybe 8 billion gallons. But they were going to, at that point, that plan was going to suck all the water out of the ground in 5 years. So, yeah, there may be some additional gallons. Nobody really knows how much is contaminated. It's somewhere between maybe 2.5 billion and 8 billion, or more by now.
Yeah, I think the important point is when you look at the plumes, there's where dioxane is, and you know where it is not. The important thing is to turn things on and look at those contours. If we start to do a lot of academic research into mass and all that other stuff, it's fun, but it really doesn't change what we need to do. We need to get in there and get those concentration contours changed. Knock that mass down. Now, in terms of the schedule, as I said, Evergreen's restarted October 11th and that's Monday. Then the baseline data, we went forward and collected all of that. I think it was Friday. We had some data, not all of it. We faxed it to Roger and Patty, and Sybil, I think, got hers today. But as we get data from that, we should have all of it in by the 9th. And what we're doing is just providing the raw data to folks. So you'll have it on diskette and hard copy, so you guys can play with it while we're playing with it. Okay? So we'll have that very soon. So that put us ahead of schedule, so that's already done, so that helps. Now the Western system, as we've already said, we need to understand it better. So the current schedule, as Kim said, is in the spring to get a work plan, which is going to take some additional discussion amongst us in terms of what do we need to do here. We need to look at the baseline data first, and then we'll go forward with that. Then the field test, it seems like a long time, but right now it's looking like 7 or 8 months before we can turn on extraction wells and start treating and re-injecting. Let me walk through that a little bit. I'd like to be able to say that we've already cut a month off because we're ahead of schedule on the baseline. So our personal goal, and Kim is committed to expedite this and put the resources forth to do that, we might be able to get it done in 6 months. We'll do it as quickly as we can without going too fast. But the kinds of things that we're going to have to do in order to make this work, just so you have an appreciation for doing it right and why it takes so damn long, is we need to get approval from DEQ, which I don't think is going to be an issue. We should have that tomorrow, I think. And then, is that right?
Everybody here signing off now, saying, yeah, let's go.
So now we have the baseline water quality and elevation survey. We've got that done. That's 100% complete, so we gained a month there. Then we have to take the data and do what I said, look at it, say where is the dioxane, where isn't it, and what's going on with the hydraulics so that we can go forward with the test. We just need to understand that. Don't want you to spend a lot of time, but you guys spend some time. Then we have a scheduled meeting with citizens and DEQ to discuss the findings of the baseline as they pertain to how we're going to move forward. So we want some input on that. Then we need permission from the DEQ to go ahead and do re-injection, which again, I don't think is a problem. Right? You're ready to do that now, right? Right? Yesterday. So we don't expect any problem there, but it's an administrative mechanic, really. It's no problem with that. And then another thing that we put in here, which again was something that was in Kim's mind for a long time and a lot of citizens, and that is to update the residential well survey. Go around and let's figure out, well, who's on well water, who's on municipal water, what are they using it for, where are they screening, that kind of thing. We really need to update that data. And that was, Kim has to take credit for that thought, in addition to some of the citizens. I woke up in the middle of the night. So we have to do a residential well survey because it's important to understand where we have water and dioxane and where people have wells. So we put that in. Then we have to construct the pontoon reinjection well. You got to do that and the piping. Then at the same time, to accelerate the schedule, since we already know we're not going to be able to put all the water back into the C3, we have to find a location to put it in the D2. Okay? So, okay, thinking ahead to how we do that. So what we're going to need to do is that after we construct the pontoon reinjection well, then we can take the drill rig into the northwest core where the D2 unit is supposed to be, and poke some holes over there and find a suitable location down the road to put the next injection well for kind of advance. And then you go through, after that, then you got to go through all the system checks with the treatment system that's already in place. With PSI, it's a 30-day period where the system has to be checked out to make sure it's working properly. So there's the plan out there. And then we're ready to start turning things on. It's going to take some time. And we'll make it happen as quickly as we can, but not so fast that we make a mistake. Yes, sir?
When you do the residential well checks, are you gonna include a few sites that are sort of random, that you don't think there ought to be a hit on, just to check your understanding of the shape of the plumes?
Yeah, there's a fair amount in the file. Now, what we need to do is take that and basically that, but it would include those that we think are just totally, out of the area of interest altogether, just to get a feel for what the subsurface conditions are. Particularly, say, in the southwest of Gelman, would be one area, for example. Elizabeth would be another one, for example. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess I meant around the whole area, say half a dozen where you're pretty sure you won't get hit.
Yeah, that's what I was
just to
saying in
check your
terms
understanding.
of over here where we haven't got hits, this is one area. Down over here in the southwest corner, is another area. That kind of thing, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Good point. So in summary, we're going to make it work, but we need help. So what we need to do is get together from time to time, say, here's what we got, here's the next step, here's what we got to do. We got to work through this. We're going to need help. So is there any questions? Do you understand what we're trying to do? Yes, sir.
The shiny picture there is,
Treatment system.
that's where the conversion takes place before the water goes back into.
That's correct. You're absolutely correct. Water is piped in here into this equalization tank, it's mixed up basically, and it goes down through this feed line. This is where the hydrogen peroxide is. This is all in place. Matter of fact, Kim said if you wanted to tour sometime, interested groups, happy to show you the system. So the peroxide comes out of here, and there's an overhead feed into the water that's coming in from the purge wells. And here's where the actual treatment occurs, where the UV lamps are. So what the peroxide does, is everybody knows, the electrons get in there and they open up the bond, and then the UV light bag busts through.
So is there a new team being put together to manage that? Or are you using the same team that you used previously?
I don't know who the former team was. All I know is I'm working with Kim.
But it wasn't working very well.
There's a
from what I
different team, there's a
understand.
different team. Personnel selection is a very big issue, and to, looking at getting the right personnel. Rick is acting in a supervisory role right now. The cleanup effort reports directly to me, so I've got personal responsibility in it. And have only degree engineers that are working with the treatment systems.
And this is a separate and different system than the one that's at Evergreen that's been operational. This has not yet been
This is
operating.
the one
This is at their facility. We'll take large volumes of water and do treatment and destruction there. The experience to date has been with a smaller scale version up in the Evergreen plume there. And that has had, there's been some operational problems with it, largely with the following of the well upon injection.
While we're on that subject, isn't this the same machine that they did pilot testing with and it's been upgraded in this last year or so?
Yeah, basically there was a few days, test, this kind of thing, this thing kind of generally work. But in terms of a full-blown system
Right.
startup,
But in terms of machine working, this is what gave initial indication that this is the process that really works well.
it works in terms, from a chemical point of view, in terms of it knocks hell out of dioxane, gets it out of water.
So as far as information on the level of dioxin now, is that's where it's coming from, all the data? In other words, it's gonna tell us whether it's at non-detect or 3 ppb,
Yeah,
or do
they-
you have to go to the wells to find out what the situation is as far as the dioxin is concerned?
Okay, well, we monitor the concentration of dioxane that's coming into the treatment system. So that's one point, same as what we do at Evergreen, watching the concentrations as they come in. And in addition, there is in the schedule, in the detailed schedules, there are frequencies to collect samples from monitoring wells so that we can see the effects of the pump and treat on the dioxane concentration. So we use both. So is that anything?
But the big bulk
Checking
of,
when it leaves here, though.
Oh, yeah,
That's-
the
that's
effluent
my
is also
guess.
tested, yes, the effluent is also tested. Yes, thank you. Yes, sir.
You gave us a schedule to the point where it's going to start. When does it end? Best estimate. When is everything done in tech, all the equipment?
Yeah, what I want to do with that is as I collect data, then you and I will make that
Is
determination.
that 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
I really can't say. They're so variant on these groundwater pump and treats. I've seen some that are amazingly effective and you wouldn't expect it in a few years. It takes a lot of mass out. And we have so much in the core to get out. I'd like to get through the first couple of years. And then after that, we'll see where we are in the curve, because it really varies.
Well, but it's going to vary a lot on how much water you're treating. I mean, and I ran through some numbers and it said if you were treating only 100 gallons per minute, it would take you, what was it, 152 years to treat it.
Well, what's deceptive about that when you do those calculations is you really can't predict all the factors associated with Mother Nature. So, I mean,
I tend to make it worse instead of better.
No,
I think the best I can do right now is say, I think that we're prepared that this goes on for a very long time. And I don't know what very long time means yet.
Unfortunately, I think the homeowners would like it to go on for a very short time. And by that, I mean, get it all done quickly.
I mean, it'd be nice if you had some, one day it was there and one day it was gone, but I don't.
The ultimate goal then is to treat everything to 77 parts per billion, and then that's it.
Is that the criteria?
Yes. And there are some kind of interim objectives. Prior to getting to that point, we've got some interim objectives of arresting this area that's 500 ppb concentration. Be withdrawing at a rate that, still we won't know for sure when we're going to get down to the 77 part per billion level, but we'll have some assurance that the core area is not expanding. Secondly, then, similarly, to arrest the front at the 77, which is the new state standard, assure that's not expanding. Now, there's the factors that come into play with the re-injection, how that plays in the balance out, so that's why it's a very iterative staged process.
So we have to be very, very open and honest with what you're trying to do. And that is, when you do groundwater pump and treat, you're going to, early on, however you want to define early on, you're going to get a big bang. We're going to pull a lot of stuff out of there and have those concentrations are going to drop like that. Then we're going to get to the next stage where they're not going to change that fact. And that's where it gets difficult to answer your question. I don't know, when we get to that big slug that we get out of there, it's easy to get out of the system. And then to try and go after that, the rest of that down to some, whatever level we're going to end up at, I don't know. And nobody can say that. Without ongoing data to say, well, how effective is it? And are we flat, or is it still getting better, or not? That's something we're going to have to work through. But those are the realities of pump and treat.
Let me ask another question. When you're down to 77 parts per billion, is that safe to use as well water?
I think the point that Kim made is the important thing. And that is, as we go through this process, we will do what's right. If we, like Kim said, if we are still affecting worthwhile change here, independent of what the law says, and it's the right thing to do, then that's what we'll do. And I believe. Yes, sir.
Try to just follow up that in that a direct position of the state nowadays is with regards to drinking water standards, cleanup standards. And the action amending our cleanup statute this last spring did establish the basis upon which standards for drinking water consumption and cleanups are set, and that level is 77. So the formalized position of the state from a regulatory standpoint would be that, yes, a cleanup to 77 makes that aquifer usable again. That number used to be 3, now it's at 77. The important thing to remember is that the water will be treated to 77 before it's re-injected, and should, as a backup system, any water have to go back into the creek, the company is committed, and we will put this into the consent judgment, that treatment go down to 3 parts per billion in that unit.
There's a question on that, John.
Yeah, approximately using a unit or measure of volume, now we go to you, what's the difference in cost between treating a given volume of groundwater to 77 parts per billion versus 3 ppb?
There is a difference. In the usage of the peroxide, so you kind of do your own proportions, whatever X is and Y in terms of 77 versus 3 or not detect. And also in the electrical associated with the UV lamps, because those are the 2 things that serve to treat the groundwater. So those are the principal factors. There are other ones, but in terms of the effect, I'm sorry. I can't remember now either, but I don't want to.
Like a general percent, is it 50%, double it?
I want to say something like 25 to 50%, but that, again, I'd have to go look at it. I haven't done those calculations in a long time. But there's that kind of difference between 77 and there is a cost to that. That's the best I can do.
Do you have approximate dollar value just for, say, treating with 77?
I don't, Kim might. Is this one?
I don't remember the calculation.
We've been through so many, I really can't.
I've been through so many numbers.
I can't remember which one it is. It's a big number. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
7 or 8 month estimate that was on the former place.
For the schedule?
Is that's the actual startup of this system, or this
Correct.
system? That's the projected startup. And that
Yeah, they have all
will
the,
begin.
yeah, all the wells purging, put into the treatment system and out to the reinjection. That's correct. Yes. And then,
Right, you're all together.
Should that drinking water standard be changed by the state and will run and hold to the 77 part per billion through the duration of the cleanup?
I think what we contemplated is that the standard moves. I'm gonna hold to the 77 if the standard should move up, and I would anticipate that if the standard would move down, we would move with the standard.
Would that be a red cross in the consent judgment, or would we have to go to court again?
I don't know. I don't.
I think that if they change the standards, it's more of an administrative update or change to the consent judgment.
When the changes were made in the legislation that resulted in the standard for this substance going from 3 to 77, the statute, the legislative change mandated or gave the parties that were already entered into settlements the ability to change their number to the current number. It may have to do with how any further change in the standards is enacted in state law before we can really interpret how that would work here.
Yes, sir.
How long have you been consulting on this project?
It seems like years, but it's only been a few months.
Okay. And what's the role of Charles Gelman in the future of this endeavor?
I don't know, I report to
Yeah.
Jim Davis.
I'm asking.
Well, he's chairman and chief executive officer of the company, but he's not currently actively involved in this effort. Other than, there's times I seek him for advice and counsel, but he's not in the day-to-day effort right now.
I would like to, should we take time before it gets any longer into the evening to give an opportunity for any folks that would like to make comments on the plan at this point, either on behalf of themselves or on behalf of a group. Do we have anybody that does want to address us in the group at this point?
I have a question. The treating is...
Just a moment. If that's the case, going back to question and answers, but we're a little beyond what we had scheduled.
Well, I wanted to make a statement on behalf of the Board of Scio Residents for Safe Water, just to kind of reiterate that we have been involved in the process since Kim mentioned, since the summer. Roger and I met and had lunch with him and started talking about how we might move forward with things. And it's been a gratifying process so far after having many months and years that concerned citizens have worked on these issues. It has been refreshing, really, to have the opportunity to have some give and take in our conversations. And as an example, when the first draft of the work plan came through, some citizens had concerns about that, and we were able to sit down with Kim and Rick and DEQ representatives and hash that out. And that was an opportunity that we were thankful for, and we were able to agree on the outcome. So I wanted to say that we've had the opportunity to review the work plan. We feel that the company is making honest efforts to move ahead at this point, and we look forward to being involved in the process of being involved in the monitoring group.
Thank you, Patty. Anyone else care to make a comment? Yeah, we'll go back to questions and answers in just a moment, but general comments on the proposal for plan commission?
I'm impressed that they're going to share the data with us. Data is being shared when it becomes available.
Yeah, and it's prompt too.
And I'm fairly
Gary, I just want to add that we met quite a few times over the summer, and at the same time, we were doing the changes in 307, the new 77 parts per million. And I was certain that we were not going to come to the kind of conclusion that we did because of the way, the direction the state was going in. So it's, to me, personally very gratifying to see that Gelman Sciences is coming in under, on the Honey Creek, at least at 3 parts per billion, and 77 parts per billion. It's much better than anything that I would have been able to say last spring that this would ever happen, because I was certain it was going to be much, much worse than this, if in fact it was going to happen at all. So I think this is really encouraging, and I'm really proud, Kim, I hope you stay around, however, for a very long time.
You're here.
Unless, yes, sir.
Recalling past history of this problem, I remember some years ago, there was an injection procedure that was a failure. How does what we're planning today compare to avoid the failure of the deep well of past years?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to respond to that, in that the deep well did what it was intended to do. It received a large quantity of the dioxane from the core area and took it down deep below usable aquifers into deep subterranean systems that aren't used for water supply. That means removal of dioxane from the core area was not continued by Gelman when it became time for the authority to use that well to be reestablished, and largely it was a business choice, and I'm not sure if you were involved at that time, but they decided not to re-permit that deep well injection.
2 reasons. One, the design capacity for the deep well, 5,000 feet, around 45 feet. So that's all it was designed to take, number one. Number two, it became plugged. Didn't work anymore. So those are the 2 reasons.
Then, my question was, because that was a failure, what's the difference in the process today? Was that water untreated? Was that the difference?
That was untreated water. This is disposal to a different area after a great deal of treatment and a large commitment that this is going to be the mechanisms by which the the groundwater after treatment is managed such that there will be continued data developed, and then the stages in the project also allow the system to be optimized so its efficiency can be increased over time.
Okay, then the main improvement of today's idea is the fact that the sales system was non-treated water, just going down deep.
The other system, the system that was not continued, was not a treatment system.
No treatment.
This is beneficial, and this is contaminant recovery and treatment's going to happen on this one. Looks like we're back to question and answers. Let me just give a couple concluding comments, and then my staff and Gelman's, I'm sure, are available to continue with specific questions for those that care to remain. One, remember, treatment of the water prior to reinjection will be to the 77 parts per billion, which is the state criteria for residentially usable groundwater. If, in the event that the system had to put some water back to Honey Creek, to the state surface waters, treatment would be to the 3 part per billion level, which in fact was the old groundwater cleanup standard. We would be intending to give Gelman a response to their proposal by November 7th that largely would give them our concurrence to proceed with this, pending receipt of any other comments from folks on the proposal and our final analysis of it. I think on some of the handouts or places comments can go. We do have a couple email addresses in our office now that can be used if people wish to contact us here. On the back table also is the department calendar, which is also available on internet or the World Web or whatever it is. I haven't quite figured out how to get there, but those of you that do know how to do that, that want to use the department calendar on its electronic version to know when other meetings of this type are scheduled, the address for that is on the back table.
Gary, you're going to have to change all your email addresses to @deq.state.
That'll probably be a long time out before that happens, because this one just seems to be in and working, and I hope, hopefully, the other side, they might change that on us and not have anything. We'll be giving a response to this proposal very shortly, but there is a couple weeks yet for folks to contact us. Gelman will give us all more input on it in the intro. Gelman will be producing the data from the recent monitoring, doing analysis of that, and presenting them the details for the stage 1 purge and treat and reinjection system. And we'll look forward to some more public comment and dialogue at that time. And that will be a few months from now. We will, on that same time frame, be amending the consent judgment so we have a legally binding agreement to go forth with the cleanup program of this nature and have the consent agreement and the formal settlement reflect more accurate dates, performance milestones, etc. Very optimistic that by the spring we will have a purge and treat system, a significant groundwater cleanup action underway again as we have the field test of the core system, purge and treat, initiated. That will be followed by a several-month period for collecting data from it to monitor how it's performing and have the basis to optimize that system some months down the road so that we have a much clearer idea about when the final cleanup will occur and what kind of system has to be operating and in place to effectuate the full capture of the plume core area and get us on a full timetable toward the full cleanup program. That's the general schedule, our course of action from here. I'm very appreciative of where we're at today as opposed to where we have been most of the last 2 or 3 years that our agency, old and new, have been wrestling with this for the various parties. And I look forward to it continuing on a very useful track. Now, I think I'd like to just, again, thank you for coming, but those who wish to stay, please feel free to do so, and we can go back to questions and answers. Did we get this?
I'd like, can I just come back to the question about the difference in the cost to treat to 77 versus 60, which is a number that was in the original consent judgment, versus 3 versus, less than 3 or non-detect. I just want to make a comment, and that is that the vendor that has provided us with the treatment system is contractually bound to be able to demonstrate that they can clean and treat the water removed out of the contaminated area to 3 parts per billion or less. So during the initial field trial or the field test, one of the things that has to happen is that we'll be treating down below that 3 parts per billion level to demonstrate that we're capable of doing that. Now, one of the things, and I'm going to just share this, I'm going to share it, but I'm also going to preface this by saying that this is not a commitment on my behalf or any part of the company. But one of the things that I have considered doing, because all of the information we've seen about the cost to run these systems is estimates. I mean, the vendor of the equipment, the people that are giving us the equipment have said, well, we think at these levels of concentration of 1,4-dioxane coming in and treating to these levels, it's going to cost this much, or estimates. I've actually contemplated operating the system at different levels of treatment for a period of time that we could measure, and we could get some real data on, you know, what does it cost to operate it if you're cleaning to 77? What does it cost if you're cleaning to, you know, 50? What does it cost if you're cleaning to 3? Because I'll tell you, fundamentally, I have a belief that says if you get 60, which is a number that was in the original consent judgment, versus 3 versus, you know, less than 3 or non-detect. I just want to make a comment, and that is that the vendor that has provided us with the treatment system is contractually bound to be able to demonstrate that they can clean and treat the water removed out of the contaminated area to 3 parts per billion or less. So during the initial field trial or the field test, one of the things that has to happen is that we'll be treating down below that 3 parts per billion level to demonstrate that we're capable of doing that. Now, one of the things, and I'm going to just share this, I'm going to share it, but I'm also going to preface this by saying that this is not a commitment on my behalf or any part of the company. But one of the things that I have considered doing, because all of the information we've seen about the cost to run these systems is estimates. I mean, the vendor of the equipment, the people that are giving us the equipment have said, well, we think at these levels of concentration of 1,4-dioxane coming in and treating to these levels, it's going to cost this much, or estimates. I've actually contemplated operating the system at different levels of treatment for a period of time that we could measure, and we could get some real data on, you know, what does it cost to operate it if you're cleaning to 77? What does it cost if you're cleaning to, you know, 50? What does it cost if you're cleaning to 3? Because I'll tell you, fundamentally, I have a belief that says if you get the water out of the ground, treat it as clean as you can before you put it back in. I mean, if you can take it out and you can treat it to 0 cost effectively before you put it back in, it's one less time you got to bring that water out to treat it again. I mean, all the dioxane you can get out the first time you take it out, you're not going to be pumping it out again to clean it another time to get it from 77 to some lower level. So I think the right answer to that is we're going to measure and we're going to study the equipment. If we can clean it cost effectively to less than 77, I mean, if we could treat it to 3 at the same, if we discover that we could treat it to 3 at the same cost as treating it to 77, well, then why the heck not treat it to 3 and put it back in instead of treating it to 77 and put it back in? So, you know, we'll look at that, we'll evaluate that, we'll capture that information, we'll share that information, and we'll do what makes sense to do.
We did have one card requesting we please send all folks on the mailing list the new data on the plume concentrations, extent, map, test well readings and locations, and other pertinent information and updates. Our mailing list is at about 180 or more right now. We do maintain at least 3 information repositories that have very complete sets of data at them, and we will keep people on the mailing list aware of data being sent there and some summaries of the information. But if you've got some particular interest with regards to data availability, please see one of us.
I just want to point out, one of those places is the library at Westgate, and it's been some time since I went to that repository, but it is literally a drawer and they throw things in. It's not filed in any manner whatsoever. It's just, they just throw it in. So it's not easy to get at that information.
Okay,
unless you can somehow put it in a big red envelope or something, I don't know, but they make no effort to catalog it.
Well, we do though.
Roger, where are some of the other places? that are
Well,
for
one of them
easily
gets sent to,
understandable?
one set gets sent to Pat Ryan at the city, one set gets sent to my neighbor Dimitri Politis, one set gets sent to the Township Hall here. And for the ones that get sent to Pat and Dimitri, we review what comes in, we look at it and sort it and file it with all the previous information we've had. And let me tell you that since we've been getting the data on diskette for the sampling data from the company, we think now and we're working with the county to get the same kind of sampling data from the state health department on the residential wells that they're sampling around the peripheral, that they've restarted again this summer. So we'll be able to put those two together, and Leon has indicated that we can use the county's computer or the computer data for the well data, integrate that and form a combined database that all parties can use to do their analysis. So that we have much better data, much better organization in terms of data than we had in the past. So that's our goal as citizens.
Public repositories will send the information out of the Scio Township Hall, the Danaher West Branch Library at Westgate, that is apparently not in very good order in the Danaher Public Library. But in addition to those three places that both Roger mentioned, Pat Ryan on behalf of sort of our citizen interest
In the city,
DNR
said.
has a set, and the Scio Residents for Safe Water, Dr. Politis has a set of information. Either of those two sources might be a little easier to access in a understandable, organized manner.
Yeah, if anybody wants to help analyze data, do charts and graphs and things like that, anybody's into that, by all means, give us a call, because
I do, sir, back here, did you have, were we okay now? Okay. Apologize. You must be behind. Other questions and answers that any of us can help with?
well, there's one final comment that I think I want to make, and that's that if it weren't for citizen involvement, we probably wouldn't be here today. And that's a message that's got to go back to the state. Because it's not only 1,4-dioxane, whose levels went from 3 to 77, 25 times higher. It's basically, isn't it basically all toxin?
Yeah, some of the basic assumptions and how cleanup standards are developed, the risk.
And what was the level?
Like
What was the
1 in a
level
million
25 years
acceptable
ago?
risk went to 1 in 100,000.
Right, and the lifetime risk went from 70 years to 30 years.
Yeah, there were a couple of.
But I think when citizens realize what happened in that few-week period last spring, there may be a little turnaround in that sometime in the future. And that's why it's really gratifying to see a company like Gelman Sciences with Ken Davis in charge, going more than instead of just relaxing everything to the standard, they realized that standard may very well come back down in the future. And they're ready for that, rather than just only doing what they have to do, doing what's right. I think that's to be commended again. Now, if we can just get, everybody up to date as what really happened last spring, and is that what really people voted for, then we can go from there.
All of a sudden, the cancer risks changed.
Yeah, is anybody here from the?
I didn't vote for it.
Is anybody here from the Dexter corridor, where the Evergreen area? Does anybody live in that area? Yeah. See, if I lived there and my neighbor had his well hooked, shut down at 2 parts per billion and hooked up to the city, and suddenly mine happens to come in at 10 or something, what am I going to do? I'm not going to get free water. 77 is safe to drink where it wasn't a year ago. So those are the kind of issues that we haven't discussed here tonight, and I don't want to bring it up to start a whole new discussion, but that's the kind of thing we have to worry about as a community. Is that the kind of, what are we going to do about the people that are halfway in between?
Yeah, I encourage folks to follow up on that issue and look at the relative risks and benefits and where we're at now. I think enter into more dialogue on what the state's cleanup objectives and goals and standards should be. Yes.
I just want to say a great vote of thanks to everybody for getting going so that we will get this underway. Because for years, I think it could have gotten underway if everybody had gotten together and talked. And it's really good that finally happened.
I agree. Thank you.
Just from all of us who live here, thank you.
Gelman teams, thank you for participating tonight in the overall efforts. Citizens, thank you for your continued vigilance on this issue, and please continue the dialogue.
Good. Do you have any comments to make?
No. Where I live, man. Where we live. I got 3 kids.